Now, the other aspect of this question is going to be a recent story, which really has left a massive mark on how I perceive chess coaching and chess coaching in relation to using the engine. So, admittedly, every man and his dog is training with the engine. You can't help but notice that the top players, the top 20, their chess style is so massively influenced by the engine and what the engines indicate. You can't miss it. Like, you have to be blind to not to see it. And it's very inspiring because in some ways it shows that we try to emulate what the engines do well. We still keep the human touch. And that is what the epitome of 2,800 plus chess is today. However, during the World Championship match in Singapore, I was fortunate enough to have multiple very meaningful discussions with Grandmaster Jakob Aagaard, who is definitely one of the most respected chess coaches in the world, right? And he, in fact, joined me I was making a Chessable course about the World Championship match. So I was basically reviewing every single game, a few puzzles and whatnot. And he joined me for one of the reviews. And before we started recording, we started analyzing the game just so that, we assembled what we wanted to talk about and what were our thoughts. And he said to me that at a certain point, a certain move was played. Of course, I'm looking at the engine of, checking if everything is all right. And he goes like, I don't want to know what the engine is saying. In fact, I don't care, because what I first and foremost want to know when it comes to a certain move is the human thought. Why did Ding Liren think that this was the idea? And it doesn't matter at that point whether it comes from the engine or not, because it's still him who is playing it. And if he cannot justify it to himself, he's not going to play it, right? So he told me, dude, I want to know it. Okay, shut down the engine. Let's figure out, you and I, what the human thought is. Because that is something we can work with. We can now establish that, this was his plan. That's what he wanted to do. And once we figure out what's cooking in a certain position, then it can be extremely productive to turn the engine on and compare and contrast. But it's very, very cool to kind of train yourself into the position in a way so that you are at least, on a certain level of understanding before you turn the machine on, which is going to tell you moves that at times you have no idea, like where would that come from, because you are not accustomed to the position. You haven't engaged with it deeply. You don't have your own thoughts, right? Like, one of the best things about what he said there is that it provoked me to think and figure out what was going on. So I formulated my own ideas, my own plans, and then it no longer was the, regurgitating what the engine said. I had some ideas, we compared it to the engine, he had some ideas, and the three together created a very interesting debate, discussion, a meaningful, mass of moves and ideas. And then we weeded out the garbage, which was mostly mine. We kept the things that were good, which was mostly his and the engines. And we had a much better understanding. And more importantly, we could communicate and explain the position so much better, right? So this way, I think, once again, the key is to first deploy your own brain, try to figure out what's going on, and then add the engine on top. So turns out that I said the same thing twice, but it really struck a chord with me when we sat down with Jakob and did that analysis.
Wow, fascinating story about engines and about the World Chess Championship match. I also wanted to give an example of Gukesh, who has been reported to not use any engines before he was a strong player of GM strength. So what do you think about that? It turns out this approach worked out for him just fine.
Look, it's really strange because, of course, there were murmurs among top GMs that, I don't even know how to put it so that it doesn't sound accusatory, but there were certain top GMs who suggested that his chess was almost too good to be believable. No, definitely not. And I didn't know this story, by the way, that he wasn't exposed to engines. But I suppose it just goes to show that there are multiple ways to get to mastery and expert level. I do think, though, that nowadays, and perhaps now this is the best way to contradict me, but you would think that nowadays it's very difficult to see how top players can really be top players and remain top players without being influenced by the engine, at least to some degree.
Yeah,
At least
obviously,
to some degree.
his coach, I think, told him not to use the engine until he was like a GM. So not top GM,
All
but
right,
just like 2500.
I see. And that I would be fully in favor for. I would absolutely encourage like sub 2000 players to don't ever look at the engine. Sorry, correction, blunders, right? Look at your blunders, because most of the times you will find sub 2000 blunders are of tactical nature, and they are actually easy to understand. And even so, there is still a fair bit to discuss why they occurred, but sometimes we tend to be, a little bit blind to our own mistakes, even if they're quite sizable. So blunder check, I think, is fine. Beyond that, let's leave it to human judgment and don't worry about the engine.